Hey class, welcome back. Well, let's get ready to dive right in. And we're going to start off with today's guiding question. And that is comparing President Jackson's actions in the nullification crisis to the Worcester v. Georgia ruling. What are your thoughts regarding how he fulfilled his executive duty to enforce the United States laws? To enforce the United States laws. Uh, what do you think? Think about that. So, many states wanted to prevent tribes like the Cherokees from forming their own independent governments within state boundaries. According to a state law passed by Georgia, all Indians within its boundaries must be governed by Georgia's state laws. Mississippi and Alabama soon took similar actions. The Cherokees went to court, arguing that existing treaties between them and the U.S. federal government protected their rights and their property. The case went to the Supreme Court in 1832. This case was called Worcester v. Georgia. It looks like Worcester v. Georgia, but it's Worcester v. Georgia. Now, in 1832, this case of Worcester v. Georgia, in it, Chief Justice John Marshall declared Georgia's actions unconstitutional and stated that Native Americans were protected by the United States Constitution. Now, let me ask you a question. Was President Jackson tyrannical? Well, I'm asking this because Jackson refused to enforce the court's decision in the Worcester v. Georgia case. So let's compare and contrast the chart below because it's talking about some of the things. They're comparing what he did in Worcester v. Georgia to what he did in the nullification crisis, which you just heard about. So now in the nullification crisis, Jackson backed the federal government. He supported the federal government, which said that states did not have the right to nullify or cancel a federal law. In this case, it was the 1828 Protective Tariff, and he threatened to use military force against South Carolina if they seceded, which is what they wanted to do. Now, in Worcester v. Georgia, instead of the federal, Jackson backs the state of Georgia, not the federal government. In this case, Worcester v. Georgia, Jackson refused to enforce the Supreme Court's decision, which favored the Indians' right to their property and lands. Jackson backed the states' rights, stating that the federal government could not stop Georgia from extending its authority over the Cherokee lands. President Jackson refused to enforce the court's decision. In the nullification crisis, he had defended federal power, but in the Cherokee case, he backed states' rights. The federal government, he said, could not stop Georgia from extending its authority over the Cherokee lands. So it's almost like he picks and chooses what he wants. So there you go. That's something to ponder. Let's go to the next slide. Now, in this one, because he refused to enforce the law, Jackson took a firm stand on another key issue. It affected the fate of the Native Americans. Since the early colonial era, white settlers had forced Native Americans off their land. Indian leaders like Pontiac and Tecumseh had failed to stop the invasion of white settlers and Indian tribes pushed out of their native lands. The Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Seminole nations all lived in the southeast. Many hoped to live in peace with their white neighbors. The fertile lands they lived on were ideal for growing cotton, and settlers wanted the land for themselves and the economic potential awaiting them. Like earlier presidents, Jackson sided with the white settlers. Lands were provided beyond the Mississippi River for Indian reservations, primarily in present-day Oklahoma. Now, he believed that moving the Indian nations would provide land for white settlers and also protect the Indians from destruction. Few Indians wanted to move. After all, they're moving to a place that was not their homeland. They lived where they were. They had those that they were moving did not live out in an Oklahoma area. So the Cherokees adapted their customs in order to preserve their own way of life, creating a legal system and government that blended European and Cherokee traditions. In 1821, Sequoyah, a Cherokee silversmith, created a writing system. This was used to teach Cherokee children to read and write. The Cherokees also published a newspaper. The Seminoles in Florida resisted removal. They were led by Chief Osceola, and they began fighting the U.S. Army in 1817. Between the years of 1817 and 1858, three different wars occurred between the U.S. and the Seminoles. The First Seminole War ended in 1818. The Second Seminole War lasted from 1835 to 1842. It was the costliest war to gain Indian lands waged by the government. Ultimately, after the Third War ending in 1858, the Seminole Nation was defeated and most of them were forced to leave Florida by the government. Jackson's supporters in Congress pushed through legislation known as the Indian Removal Act of 1830. With this act, most of the southeastern Indian nations were forced west of the Mississippi. Most whites saw those lands as vast deserts, and therefore did not mind sending the Indians there. In 1838, the U.S. military drove out more than 15,000 Cherokee. They journeyed hundreds of miles west to the present-day Oklahoma over a period of several months. Thousands died, mostly children and the elderly. This sorrowful journey became known as the Trail of Tears. Well, that's all for today. See you next time when we will be discussing the Panic of 1837 and the election of 1840. Have a good day. Bye-bye.